I'm just kidding. We are at 103B at the Mishnah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Morning, Jules. You can hear me if I speak at this volume or no?
Good morning. Yes, I hear you just fine.
Okay, amazing.
The Mishnah, 103B at the Mishnah.
No? Am I wrong?
No. No. 103. Oh. We're near the beginning of 103.
I think we got to the Mishnah yesterday, no?
Maybe we did. We got skinned alive and we got to the Mishnah.
Yeah, I believe we did.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Kol hakachim she'ir behem sul kodem lahafshitan ein orusein lakohanim. La'achar hafshitan orusein lakohanim. The sacrifices that get an invalidation before you skinned the animal, those hides do not go to the kohanim. But if after you skinned the animal, there was an invalidation that was found, those hides do go to the kohanim. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Stigana Kohanim, Rabbi Chanina, the deputy of the kohanim, he said that miyamai lo ra'isi or sheyot in the basis reifa. Now, what happens if a sacrifice gets an invalidation before its hide is stripped off the animal, before it's removed? What happens to it? It goes to get burnt. Rabbi Chanina says, I never saw skin of the animal go to get burnt. Now the Gemara's gonna ask, like, what do you mean by that? We never saw it get burnt. We have cases where the skin does get burnt. So cryptic statement. And Rabbi Akiva, following the cryptic statement, says, Midvarav lamadnu shehamavshid esal b'chor v'nimtza treifa she'osa kohanim ba'oro. Rabbi Akiva says, based on Rabbi Chanina's Skana Kohanim's testimony, that if one skins a b'chor and you find that it actually has a fatal wound, it's nimtza treifa, which makes it invalid. So that the skin will go to the kohanim. Now we'll see more about this at the end of today, but usually a bechor that's not shechted properly. So you have a sanctified animal, but it's not shechted properly, and it dies, that it's forbidden to get any benefit from that skin. Here we're saying, though, if it got a wound, a fatal wound, after you already skinned it, and it's found to be a treifa, the kohanim still get the hides. The chachamim omrim no, ein lo ra'inu raya eliyot lo b'treifa. The chachamim said that Rabbi Chanina's testimony is not proof. The fact that he never saw it doesn't tell us anything, and therefore, such an animal, if the wound is found after the bechor has been stripped of the hides, you would still take the hides and take them to be burnt. Okay, now we're going to have a contradiction. This Mishnah versus our previous Mishnah. This Mishnah is very clear that the determining factor of the Kohanim having a merit in the hides was it stripped, and then there was a blemish found in the meat, or was it not? It doesn't mention anything about the throwing of the blood. The previous Mishnah said that everything depends on when the mizbeach, when the altar gets the meat, meaning as long as the blood was thrown, if a blemish is found afterwards, you're good to go. So the Gemara is about to ask the contradiction. It says the Gemara, Kol shelo zaka mizbeach v'basaro. The previous Mishnah told us that as long as the mizbeach, the altar, did not merit the meat, which means the blood of the animal has not been thrown, and therefore the meat cannot be brought up onto the altar. So what follows? Lo zakwa kohanim ba'ora. If the meat is never fit to be accepted onto the altar, the Kohanim will never get the skin. Says the Gemara, the Afal Gav, the Afshite or Kodem Zrika. That Mishnah sounds like even if you skinned the animal before Zrika, before the blood was thrown, it does not matter. What matters is, the pivotal point is throwing of the blood. If the altar does not merit the meat, the Kohanim don't merit the hides. Our Mishnah says the pivotal point is, as long as the hides were stripped, even before the throwing of the blood, as long as they were removed from the animal, so then, even if you find a blemish in the animal, the hides still go to the Kohanim. So that's a contradiction. What is the pivotal point? Removal of the hides, and if afterwards a blemish is found, the hides still go to the Kohen, and I don't care when that happens, even before throwing the blood. Our Mishnah, previous Mishnah is, it all depends on the throwing of the blood. If before the blood is thrown, the hide is removed, and there's a blemish that's found in the meat, then you can't put the meat up on the altar. Even though the hide was removed, the Kohanim don't get any benefit. So that's a contradiction. So we're going to suggest one answer, money, that first Mishnah that says that the determining factor is the throwing of the blood, that reflects the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the Rabbi Shimon, the Amar, as he says, Ein Hadam Miratza al Ha'or Bifnei Atzmo. There's going to be a debate, two opinions. When you throw the blood up, does it permit the hides on their own, or the hides always follow the meat? Is there such an idea that we know that throwing the blood permits the meat to be placed onto the altar, but what if there's meat and then there's hides before the throwing of the blood? Does that throwing of the blood affect the hides on their own, or the hides always follow the meat? So Rabbi Shimon says the blood can never, so to speak, be useful for the hides. The hides always follow the meat. Therefore, that's the first Mishnah. That if when you throw the blood, the meat is not fitting for the altar, the hides follow suit. If the meat is fitting for the altar, the hides follow suit. There's no such thing as throwing the blood on the altar just for the hides, to allow the hides to go to the Kohanim. That doesn't exist. So that would be the first Mishnah. The problem is, Ema Seifa, look at our Mishnah. Kol Hakach, our Mishnah. The first line of our Mishnah. Kol Hakach Mishir Sol Kodem Shitan, Ein Arasein LaKohanim, but La'achar if Shitan Arasein LaKohanim. Our Mishnah is very clear that if you were to strip the animal before the throwing of the blood, and then you throw the blood, even though the meat has an invalidation, the hides are still going to go to the Kohanim. But according to Rabbi Shimon, the hides don't have their own, they're not their own entity. They follow with the meat. We see here clearly not that way. So says the Gemara, okay, that reflects the opinion of Rebbe. Asal the Rebbe, the Amar Hadam or Bifnei Atzmo. Rebbe is the other opinion. He says hides, the skins of the animal, could be affected on their own. They don't follow the meat. They have a fundamental debate. Rabbi Shimon and Rebbe, do the hides follow the meat? Yes or no? Rabbi Shimon says no. That reflects the first Mishnah. Rebbe says yes. That reflects the second Mishnah. Now remember, the Mishnayos weren't broken up the way we have them broken up. It was all one long Mishnah. So when you have one long Mishnah, you want it to be consistent, especially when it's like this close together. Better to have one author than two authors. So that's the next attempt at the Gemara. Is there any way to read our Mishnah according to Rabbi Shimon, or the first Mishnah according to Rebbe? So, Reisha Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, say for Rebbe, the first part of the Mishnah is Elazar Rabbi Shimon. That's the previous Mishnah. This Mishnah reflects the opinion of Rebbe. We don't like that. We want to be consistent. Amar Abaye says, Abaye, I'll make it work for you. Me the say for Rebbe. How do you go? So Abaye said this. This Mishnah is the opinion of Rebbe. The first Mishnah is also the opinion of Rebbe. Now, How could the first Mishnah be the opinion of Rebbe? The first Mishnah sounds like the skins follow with the meat. If the meat is fit for the altar, the skins are fit for the Kohanim. That's not Rebbe. Rebbe can split. Rebbe says that the hides are not dependent on the meat. And the determining factor is not the throwing of the blood, it's the stripping of the animal. So how could the first Mishnah be Rebbe? Umo de Rebbe she'ein hefshek kod mizrika. The first Mishnah wasn't telling us something so much halakhic. It was much more practical. Usually, the standard is we never skin the animal before zrika. That's just the norm. What would happen if it was stripped before zrika, and then there's an invalidation found in the meat? Then the hides would still go to the Kohanim. It's true. But the Mishnah that said it's all dependent on the throwing of the blood was telling us a much more practical thing. That's when it normally happened. So that's why that first Mishnah could still reflect the opinion of Rebbe. Rava Amar, no, the other way. Miduresh Rabbi Shimon, Steifanami Rabbi Shimon. Go the other way. Since the beginning is Rabbi Shimon who said that the hides don't have their own entity, they follow the meat. So too is our Mishnah. Now, second, how can it be our Mishnah? Our Mishnah very clearly states that the determining factor of the hides going to the Kohanim is, were you or were you not stripped off the animal? Nothing to do with the throwing of the blood. So how could this be the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon? So he says, what does it mean our Mishnah says if there was invalidation before it was stripped or after it was stripped? What does that mean? Turning the page. So what it means is it doesn't mean physically it was stripped. It means after they become fit for skinning. Now, when does it become fit for skinning? So once again, practically it's skinned only after the throwing of the blood. So even though you could do it earlier, there's no prohibition. You can skin the animal even before the throwing of the blood, but that's not what's usually done. So according to Rabbi Shimon, when it said in our Mishnah that the determining factor is before and after the throwing of the blood, it didn't mean practical. The determining factor was the stripping of the animal. It didn't mean the practical stripping of the animal. It meant when was it fit to be stripped, which practically is only after the throwing of the blood. So both Mishnayos can fit according to one author. According to Rava, it's going to be Rebbe. According to Bai, it's going to be Rebbe. And according to Rava, it'll be Rabbi Shimon. Now, where are these two opinions reflected? Where do we find Rebbe and where do we find Rabbi Shimon? That's the next question. Ma'i Rebbe, Uma'i Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, as the Brisa states, Rebbe Omer, Hadam Meratza Ala Or, the blood that affects the permissibility, the acceptance of the skin on its own. Bifnei atzmo, ukishehu ima basar. Once it's with the meat, so then nolad bo psul bein kodem zrika bein lachar zrika harei ukiyotze bo. Rabbi says if it's off the animal, so it had its own entity. If it's still attached to the animal, it'll follow the animal. That's all Rebbe. Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon says, Ein hadam miratza al ha'or b'fnei atzmo. The blood will never cause acceptance of the skin of the hide on its own, and it's never going to happen. It doesn't have its own entity. It always follows the meat. Even if it's stripped off the meat, it still follows the meat. So now, if it's with the meat, so then no psul kodem zrika. If invalidation happens before the blood is thrown, harehu kayotzibo. It's the same as the meat. Achar hazrika. If invalidation happens after the throwing of the blood, so then kurtze basar sha'achas. If for one moment the meat was good, so then yafshitanu, strip the animal and give the hides to the kohanim, and the oro, the hides, are going to go to the kohanim. Yeah. So everything follows the meat. If the meat was good, then the hides are good. If the meat wasn't good, then the hides aren't good. And Rabbi will argue. Okay. So now, this machlokas, Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon about the hides being dependent on the permissibility of the meat sounds very similar to another debate. Lema with Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua, say that they argue about the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua. What do they argue about? Let's see. It says in the Brisa, "Va'asisa oila secha habasar v'hadam." You should make the ola, the meat, and the blood. So what does that mean? Rabbi Yeshua Omer, im ein dam, ein basar, im ein basar, ein dam. The blood and the meat are very much dependent on each other. Meaning that according to Rabbi Lazar, if the blood is not fit to be thrown, so then you can't put up the meat. And if you can't put up the meat, then you can't do the blood. They're very much dependent one on the other. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's the first opinion. So they're totally dependent on each other, according to Yeshua. You can't do one without the other. The invalidation of one causes the invalidation of another. So that very much reflects the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that the hides are dependent on the meat, the same way the blood and the meat are dependent on each other. So let's say you have a case where the blood is invalid for whatever reason, then the meat cannot be placed on the altar. And vice versa, if the meat is invalid, so the blood can't be thrown. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, which sounds like the opinion of, it reflects similar to the opinion of Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now, Rabbi Eliezer argues on Rabbi Yeshua, and he says, Omer, dam afapisha in basar, blood is not dependent on the meat. Shinamar v'dam zevachacha yishafeh. Even if the meat is not good, you pour the blood on anyway. One is not dependent on the other. What do you do with that verse that Rabbi Yeshua used to make his exposition? Just like blood, just like blood is to be thrown onto the altar, so too meat has to be thrown on the altar, which teaches you there's a small space between the ramp and the altar, and you toss the meat onto the altar. So a totally parenthetical point from that verse, not what we're talking about. But there's a fundamental debate. There's blood and meat dependent on each other. So now, Lema say the following: So say that the hides being not dependent on the meat is like Rabbi Lazar, and Mandam Lohurta, the hide is dependent on the meat, is like Rabbi Yeshua. Says the Gemara, no, not so fast. Why? There's no debate. There's no debate regarding the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, because according to him, everyone's going to agree that the blood and the meat could be interdependent of each other. They're not dependent one on the other. So in the world of Rabbi Eliezer, so then everyone's going to agree that he would agree that in our case the hide is going to be not dependent on the meat. So meaning, according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, everyone's going to agree that he holds that the hides are not going to be dependent on the meat. Where do they argue? They argue according to Rabbi Yeshua. According to Rabbi Yeshua, who said that the blood and the meat are dependent on each other, what would he hold about skins and meat? So that's a debate. So now, keep plea, Yaliv Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua, the one who says that the hides are dependent on the meat, which is our opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Shimon. So then He says, Rabbi Yeshua, who holds blood and meat are dependent on each other, will agree that hides and meat are dependent on each other. And the other opinion of Rebbe will say, no, we're going to make a split. Rabbi Yeshua is going to say blood and meat are dependent on each other, but even he'll agree to me that hides and meat are not dependent on each other. Why would you split? So, Man, the Amar Hurtza, according to the opinion that says that the hides are not dependent on the meat, Rebbe, so Rebbe is going to say as follows. Amar lach, ad kama kama Rebbe Yeshua Hasan, Elaba Basar, the lake of Seder, the Kohanim, or they consider the Kohanim, Afilu, Rebbe Yeshua Mode. So, according to Rebbe says that the skins are not dependent on the meat. He'll say that even Rabbi Yeshua agrees to me. Even Rabbi Yeshua, who said that the blood and the meat are totally dependent one on the other, and if one's invalid, then the other one can't be put onto the altar, he'll agree to me, though. What's the difference? Meat, there's not such a loss. Lake up say that, not such a loss. So there, one is dependent on the other. However, where there is a big loss, like the skins, then he'll agree to me that even though the meat's invalid, the skins will still go to the Kohanim, just like he holds post facto. Midei dehave adiyava. What does it mean, just like he agrees post facto? Let's see. You have meat that's invalid, or it goes outside the courtyard, or becomes impure, invalid, or leaves the courtyard. Rabbi Eliezer, Omer Yisrael, doesn't matter. Throw the blood. Even though the meat's invalid, throw the blood. Rabbi Yeshua says, Lo Yisrael, no, you can't throw the blood. But Rabbi Yeshua agrees, Rabbi Yeshua Shim Zara Korza. If the blood is thrown, then yes, the meat is still going to be acceptable. So Rabbi Yeshua agrees that post facto. So once again, there's two debates happening. There's one debate regarding our Mishnah. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Rebbe. Are the hides interdependent of the meat or not? If one becomes invalid, do the hides still go to the Kohanim? That's one machlokas. There's another machlokas, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, about are the blood and the meat interdependent? According to Rabbi Eliezer, that says that they are, that says that they're not. So that there's no debate about. The debate is according to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says blood and meat are dependent on each other. So if you hold the hides and the meat are dependent on each other, so very good. But if you hold like Rebbe that the hides and the meat are not dependent on each other, so he'll tell you, in my case of hides and meat, because the hides are so expensive, it's the same as Rabbi Yeshua post facto. Even Rabbi Yeshua agrees that if something happened, if the blood was already thrown, so then we're not going to invalidate the meat. So too he'll agree by the case of the hides. It's not a case of post facto, but it's similar because it's very expensive. That if there's a blemish that's found, so then you could still give the hides to the Kohanim. Now, that's that. So once again, either our Mishnah and the previous Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, that they are dependent on each other, the hides and the meat, or the opinion of Rebbe that they're not. That's machlokas of Ayin and Rabbah. And okay, so the Mishnah says that Rabbi Chanina, the deputy Kohen Gadol, said, "I never saw hides being taken out to be burnt." Says the Gemara, what do you mean? There's a whole number of offerings that you burn the animal and you burn the hides. So below Bahari Parman Instructim. Now we're going to get back to this in the next Mishnah, right? I think it's 4 cases. So you have the bull of the Kohen who makes a mistake from Horios. You have the bull that's brought when the community makes a mistake. You have the bull that's brought when we made a mistake for Avodah Zarah. And you have a bull and a he-goat that is brought on Yom Kippur. Those 4 are called the Purim HaNisrafim and the Seirim HaNisrafim. And they get fully burnt. We'll see more about this coming up in the next Mishnah. They have special laws. They and their hides get burnt. So what do you mean Rabbi Hanina says we never saw it get burnt? These animals get burnt and their hides get burnt. How can you say I never saw hides get burnt? Not true. Says the Gemara, no. When Rabbi Hanina was talking, it was mitzvah lo kamina. I wasn't talking about your regular mitzvahs. I was talking about before, after there's invalidation in the animal. Hare kodim hefshit, the kodim zrika. So says the Gemara, but still, if you found a blemish before the animal was stripped, or before the animal had the blood thrown, that case, where the skin is still on the animal, and the blood hasn't been thrown, and you found the invalidation, then that's a regular case where you'd burn the skin with the animal. Says the Gemara, he was talking about Kollet's coming. He was talking about once the hide has been removed from the meat, I never saw the hide be burnt. I always saw it go to the Kohanim. So says the Gemara, "V'ha'ika achar hefshet the kodem zrika." What do you mean? After it's been stripped, before the blood has been thrown, the Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon, that would be a case. The Amar and or the blood cannot cause the acceptance of the skin on its own. So that should be a regular case where you would have seen the hide be burned. So says the Gemara, you're right, except for Rabbi Hanina, ki Rabbi Sfirle. Rabbi Hanina holds like Rabbi, and Rabbi holds that the hides are interdependent of the meat. So I never saw hides that have been removed from the meat be burned, because even if you find the invalidation in the meat, you'll still bring up the hides. You'll give the hides to the Kohanim. That's one answer. Clearly, Rabbi Hanina's kind of Kohanim will go like the opinion of Rabbi. Now, the Ibais Ema Afilu took Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. You could even say that Rabbi Hanina's kind of Kohanim reflects the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that says that the hides are dependent on the meat. Practically, we don't usually find skinning before the blood is thrown. So therefore, he could even go like Rabbi Shimon, and we never really found the skin being removed before the throwing of the blood. So it sounds like what he's saying is after the blood is thrown, I never saw skin being burnt. It didn't really happen that it was removed, that there was a blemish found after the throwing of the blood with the skin being removed. I never found that. Said the Gemara, 1 second, why not? What if you found a fatal wound? You shech the animal, you found a fatal wound in its internal organ. So that would retroactively render the animal invalid, and therefore you should burn the hides. Because Savar, he must hold nimseis treifa b'bnei me'ayim miratza. So he must hold that when you found an animal to be a treifa, so if after you did zrika, I think it's after you did zrika, you found the animal to be invalid. So how do you look at it? Do you say, well, the blood was already thrown, and therefore we don't say retroactively it's going to be invalid? Or do you say, no, if you found a fatal wound, you have to assume that it was invalid even before the zrika? So we're saying now that Rabbi Hanina's kind of Kohanim holds that if you threw the blood and only after found there's a fatal wound, we don't say that the whole thing is totally invalid retroactively. So, and therefore he says, I never saw the skin removed from an animal after throwing of the blood be burned. Because even if you found a fatal wound, it doesn't matter. We don't say that retroactively. It's now we say from this point onward it's fine because the blood was already thrown, so it's already valid. To that, we're saying our Mishnah reflects that a little bit. Why? It says, Rabbi Akiva responds to Rabbi Hanina's kind of by saying, from him we learn that a firstborn animal that's had to be a treifa, its skin goes to the Kohanim. Shmami no. So you don't say, retroactively the shechita was a 0 because it was wounded the entire time. No, we say that the skins will go to the Kohanim. So what is Rabbi Akiva teaching us? If Rabbi Chanina is teaching us that a fatal wound doesn't ruin the animal, so then what is Rabbi Akiva adding by saying, oh, the same thing applies to a firstborn? Why should it be different? So the rule is by a bechor that if it's not shefted properly, so then both it and its skins cannot be benefited from. So Rabbi Akiva is telling you that a bechor, the hide of a bechor, that you shech the animal and you see that it's invalid, the hide of the bechor is not the same status as if the animal was never shechted properly. So therefore, its hide could still be valid and given to the Kohanim. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. If you slaughter the animal and you found a wound in the animal, you can still eat it. But if the animal dies, so then you got to bury it. You have to bury the hides. So how do you view the hides if there's this treifa wound inside of it? Is that like it just dies retroactively? You view it like it just dead. It wasn't a valid shechita, and you'd have to bury the hides? Or you say, no, right now it was shechted, only afterwards it was found to be a fatal wound. So and therefore the hides would go to the Kohanim. Rabbi Akiva is teaching you that the hides will go to the Kohanim. Okay. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halacha Rabbi Akiva. Halacha is like Rabbi Akiva that the hides go to the Kohanim. The Af Rabbi Akiva la'amar elef yishitiru mimcha, aber lo hitiru mimcha lo. Rabbi Akiva says though it's only going to be true if an expert comes and checks out the animal to make sure to see if it was a treifa or not. It has to be an expert coming and check. If it's not an expert, then you cannot permit it. Now, usually, it's interesting. Usually, the Gemara talks about different places. You always need an expert to know what's considered a blemish on a bechor. I guess in this case, it's even for the hides to go to the Kohanim, you still need a blemish. It says one of the Rebbeim spent 18 months in the field learning what is a blemish in an animal or not, learning all the fatal wounds. The novelty here is even to permit the hides to the Kohanim, you still need an expert to permit them. Okay. The Hilchasa Kedivrei Chachamim. And the halacha is like the Chachamim in our Mishnah that disagree with Rabbi Chanina, and they'll say that if it's found to be a fatal wound, so then you say retroactively, retroactively it's not good, and therefore the hides will have to be buried. They'll have to be burnt, and they don't go to the Kohanim. So the Chachamim in our Mishnah argue on Rabbi Chanina, and Allah is like the Chachamim. Okay, here we go. So these four animals that are burnt, the burnt bulls and the he-goats, Parman Esrafim, Usirman Esrafim, whether it's the communal errors bull, or it's the Yom Kippur bull and he-goat, or it's the Avodah Zarah bull or he-goat, they get burnt. Bisman Shehin Esrafim Ki Mitzvasam. Esrafim Beis Hadeshin. There's a special place, we'll see more about this, outside Yerushalayim, that if everything goes well, you burn it outside that area. Special novelty by Yom Kippur, which applies to the other burnt bulls as well, is as follows. Umitamin begadim. They impurify your clothing. The burning of these bulls causes impurity on your clothing. Causes, I think, you and your clothing. If there's some kind of blemish that's found and something goes wrong, so then they don't get burnt outside Yerushalayim. They get burnt in a place, Nisrafim bebeis habir. That is two opinions, but somewhere in the temple now. The einan mitamin begun, and they do not cause impurity onto your clothing. Next page. Hayusov lenosan b'motos. You would carry them with sticks. So now, do the carriers get the impurity or only the burners? So now, Yatsu Harishonim Chutz B'chomas Hazaro, V'achronim Lo Yatsu, Harishonim Metamin Begadim, V'achronim Enim Metamin Begadim, Ach Yatsu. If there's a number of people carrying the bulls, the ones that have carried it, the ones in the front of the crew, when they leave the city, they now get impure. The ones that are still holding on to the bull still inside Yerushalayim, they do not get impure. Once they leave, they get impure. Yeah. Yatsu Elu. So Yatsu Elu Elu Metamin Begadim. Once everyone leaves, so then they both, their contamination for both groups. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Eina Metamin Achi Yotze Ha'or Beruba. No. Contamination is dependent on most of the animal being burned. So meaning, Nita Chabasar Ein Hasar Metamin Begadim. If the meat's already totally decomposed, deformed, totally melted, then it's not going to cause impurity. So meaning, according to Rabbi Shimon, the carriers don't get impure. The people who started the fire don't get impure. Once the fire has consumed most of the bull, so then that causes impurity. But once it's already been fully decomposed, fully melted, so that it's not going to cause impurity anymore. So I guess the people that are dealing with the fire, the barbecuers, they only will become impure once most of the bull has been burnt. Okay, now we had that if an invalidation happens in the animal, you don't bring it out to outside Yerushalayim. Rather, you do it in the bira. You burn it in the bira. My bira. What's bira? Purim's coming, so we had Shushan Habira. So, what's bira? My bira. Rabbi Baruch Chana. Rabbi Yochanan. Makom Yesh Barabayis Bira Shmo. There's actually a place on the Temple Mount, and its name is bira, and that's where you would burn these offerings. Reish Lakish Amar Kol Habayis Kulo Kari Bira. It's just a way of saying, like, the center, the capital, meaning the entire Temple Mount is called the bira. So somewhere there you burn it. Shenemar Elabira Sherachinosi. I prepared for you the bira, referring to the whole temple, not just one specific area. Okay. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baruch Hu, 3 places where you burn stuff. Beis Hadeshin Gadol Hayadazar Shisham Sorghum Kulik Kachik Kadashim Neimur Kachik Kalin. There was one place in the courtyard you would burn the invalidations of the very holy sacrifices and the sacrificial parts of the lesser holy sacrifices. If it became invalid, or the burnt bulls and the he-goats, you would burn them there also. If an invalidation happened to them before the blood was thrown, that's one place where you would burn. There was a special place where you would burn the bulls and the he-goats that got an invalidation after the throwing of the blood. Special other place. So one place for invalidation before the blood was thrown, one place for after the blood was thrown, and the third place was, like we just mentioned, a third place was outside the three sections. The place where the Kohanim can go, the Levites can go, and the Israelim can go. Outside of that was this special area where you would burn the regular, the he-goats that get burnt. If nothing wrong happened to them, you would burn them outside the courtyard. Okay. Tani Levi, so a very similar teaching of Levi, Beis Hadeshanim. There are 3 Beis Hadeshanim. One is a Beis Hadeshanim called Hayat Bazar, Sham Sorghum Kulik Kachik Kadashim Neimur Kachik Kalin. One was a place you would burn the very holy sacrifices, like a chatas, or the sacrificial parts of a less holy sacrifice, or a bull or he-goat that's supposed to get burnt, whether invalidation happened before or after the throwing of the blood. That all happened in one place. Right? That argues with our previous opinion that says there's 2 separate places. Depends when the invalidation happened. That's one place where you'd burn them. Ubeis hadesh acher haya b'harabayis shesam sorfim parman esofim sirman esofim shir ben hem sul b'yitziyasim ukimitzvasim. Sorry, shir ben sul b'yitziyasim. There was another place that you would burn the he-goats and the bulls when they became invalid with a psul of yitziyasim. So we'll see what that means. Either it became impure, the animal, or it left its confines where it's not supposed to go. I think it's going to be really an impurity. We'll see. So everyone agrees there's three places where you burnt the animals. Just the first opinion held whether there was invalidation before the blood and after the blood will necessitate a separate location for the burning. Levi holds that no, all of those invalidations are one place. There's another place you burn it if it got an invalidation of Yitzia. We'll see what that means in a second. Yeah. And kimitzvasan, if everything goes well, a normal bull that gets burnt, or a he-goat that gets burnt, so that goes outside the shalosh nachanos. That goes outside the three camps, like a normal place to burn it. Yeah. It could be that I just made a mistake. The Yitziasan over here is, Levi said that there's another place where you burn it. Yitziasan might just mean that after you left the courtyard and it became invalid. So what do you do now? So then it says it's a special place you burn it. You don't keep going and take it outside Yerushalayim. You have to burn it in a special. So that could be just any invalidation that happens to it outside the courtyard. Okay, fine. So those are the different opinions of where you burn them. Okay, here we go. So Rabbi Yirmi has a question. Lina Mahu Shetoba Parman Sofim. The meat goes overnight, stays overnight. Is that an invalidation by the burnt bulls? Remember, the burnt bulls you're burning anyways. You're not eating it. Or by the he-goats. Do you say, maybe the whole invalidation of keeping meat overnight is only when you're going to consume it? There you have an invalidation. But here, you're going to bring it out to be burnt anyways. Odil Malosha, maybe it doesn't matter. You cannot leave meat overnight, period. Amarava Hamilsa, Abaye. I asked this question to Abaye, or this question was asked to Abaye, and he answered it from the following. And he answered from the following: that Vishavin, everybody agrees, if you have a piggle thought by the cows, by the bulls, by the burnt bull, does that invalidate the animal? The answer is no. So what do you see? That the invalidation of piggle is dependent on something which will be consumed. Since these animals are not going to be consumed, there's no piggle invalidation by them. So says the Gemara, so just like an invalid thought of piggle does not invalidate the animal because it's not going to be consumed, so too leaving the animal overnight is not going to invalidate it either, since it's not going to be consumed. And that would answer our question. Says the Gemara, not so fast. Maybe you could differentiate. Who says those invalidations are comparable? Having a bad thought might not invalidate because it's special piggle rules, but maybe leaving overnight would still invalidate. So Tashma, Parman Esrafim, Mishman Esrafim, Molin Bahen, the burnt bulls and the burnt he-goats. Once they become sanctified, there is Me'ila by them. Nishchetu, once they get slaughtered, Uksharu, Lipasel Betful once they're slaughtered, they're able to be receptive to becoming Tameh by somebody who is awaiting sunset to become pure, or somebody who is awaiting to bring a sacrifice, he's still impure. So they can cause contamination on those bulls and on the he-goats. Ubilina, and by leaving overnight, seemingly an explicit brisa that says if you leave it overnight, it's going to be invalid. Says the Gemara, my love, Lina's bosser, I'm not talking about the meat of the burnt bulls and he-goats. Says the Gemara, no. There's the other part of the animal, the sacrificial limbs, and that get brought up on the altar. And those, everyone agrees that those, because they're consumed by the altar, if that is going to be left overnight, that's going to be invalid. And that's what we're referring to. Lo, linas emurim. Lo, linas emurim. One more line. Look at the end of the Bryce. It says that everyone until the meat gets fully consumed, there's still me'ilah. When you're burning them outside Yerushalayim, until the meat is fully burnt, decomposed, there's going to be a me'ilah. They're still considered misuse. So what do you see? Just like the end of the Bryce is talking about meat, so to the beginning is talking about meat. Oh, and yet you see that, so it is talking about meat, and it says there's invalidation by leaving it overnight. Says the Gemara, and with this, the end's talking about meat, and the beginning is talking about the sacrificial limbs, and therefore you can't bring a proof. We will, God willing, continue tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. I'll be back today in a few hours.
See you tomorrow morning, then. Okay.